Welcome to Climate Change with Scott Amyx. I'm your host, Scott, and today I'm joined by Brana, Dane, who is a model and activist. Welcome today.
Hi, Scott. I'm very happy to be here with you.
All right. So you are using your fashion and modeling platform to speak out on various topics, ranging from environment, climate change, sustainable fashion, and social issues. Why are some of these topics important to you?
Well, I grew up in Vancouver, Canada mostly. I'm American, but I did get my education mostly in Vancouver, and there is a greater emphasis in the curriculum on things such as being more green, turning off the lights when you exit the room, turning off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, things like that. And so it's just been more in my conscience ever since I was a child. And then after I got into modeling, I attended the premiere of The True Cost, and it really opened my eyes to the cost of fast fashion, and not only on the environment, but the human cost. And that really led me to this point that I am now.
So what would you say to those people where perhaps maybe they would say that there's a bit of a mixed message where you continue to be employed in some fashion within the fashion industry, but yet at the same time, you're going up against some of these institutional challenges?
Well, I would say that I am in the best position from the inside to make these changes. And it's actually, it's more cost to me if I get pushback versus someone who's not in the industry. So I think you can look at it that way as well. Yeah.
So for having some of these beliefs and then more importantly, actually taking an activist stance and getting involved with rallies and various NGOs and nonprofits, does that actually come in the form of sacrificing or losing certain gigs?
I mean, that's very hard to quantify. So I assume that it has had that effect. But again, it's hard to quantify, and I feel that since I've gotten more into this world, I've gotten jobs that are more rewarding for me and jobs that are a better fit for me. So that's worth it in my mind.
Okay. Now, if we're having this conversation, let's say 10, maybe 15 years ago, perhaps maybe you would have had more of an institutional resistance to some of the topics, but now it's gotten more of kind of mainstream and not just acceptable, but it's become profitable to talk sustainability from a brand and fashion and retail perspective. So in some ways, you're actually doing them a favor by talking about these things. Or do you get that sense, or is it the opposite?
Well, some brands really don't care, to be honest with you. They're not there at all. Other brands probably see it as a negative, although they don't verbally say that to me. And then other brands do something called greenwashing. So they just co-opt sustainability and put the label on without actually making the changes. So it's very important to have transparency and to have checks and balances and watch groups in this movement. So that's why I'm an ambassador for a nonprofit called Remake, because that's what they do. And otherwise, there's really only marketing gimmicks if we don't have the oversight.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because what the consumer sees is really the lipstick on a pig. We don't really truly know or have transparency into their supply chain, their manufacturing, and their practices to see if in fact they're making any changes whatsoever, or it's really about, at the end of the day, profit maximization. You talk about a number of different aspects as it relates to some of the kind of friction points. One of that is equal anxiety or guilt that comes with your job of being in fashion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So my personal view is that guilt is not a very productive emotion, and that we should actually just accept what we're willing to do. We should think about it and say, should I make a change? Am I going to make a change? And just sit with it and accept the decision that we make as individuals. I think that's much more productive. But yes, it does come up for me. I mean, there are a lot of demands to be in the public eye, and it can be difficult to live a perfectly sustainable life. And that brings me back to your first point, that it's just everyone is in the position to make compromises, be it using a car to get to work, to make money. That's everyone's life, not just someone in the fashion industry.
Yep, absolutely. Now, however, being in fashion, of course, there's kind of that day-to-day kind of decision points that you have to make. So, for example, if you have been engaged for modeling for fast fashion, for example, do you take that or not? Or because of the kind of gigs that you have to travel quite a bit, and when you're traveling via air, especially, and creating the kind of greenhouse emissions, are there issues with that? So, how do you kind of reconcile all of these things, not just in yourself, but for other people in your industry?
Well, I mean, I think you can always make better choices. Even if you are going to travel for work, you can always travel economy. You can take the bus if you're traveling within the States. There are lots of better choices that you can make. You can travel with your own utensils and water bottle, and you can reduce plastic waste that way. You can make choices with your wardrobe, and you can really publicize all these things as a model because you have a platform, presumably on social media. It's kind of a requirement now in the industry. And you also have access to greater media, usually. So those are things that other people don't have. And so if you are balanced, it's all checks and balances. So it'll probably, if you're conscious of it, it'll balance out.
You talk about some other dimensions that's not related to sustainability. One is around mental health in the fashion industry. And an interesting one that is kind of new to me is this notion of raising the minimum age of models, and of course, feminism and fashion. Can you cover some of these topics?
Sure. So, I mean, for me, that's a very big motivator is looking out and empowering women. And that's another reason that I'm very big into the sustainable fashion movement is because of about 80% of the garment workers are actually female, and they can be treated very poorly. They don't earn a living wage most of the time for their families to support them. Everyone knows about the Brana factory collapse that killed around 1,000 people. Just atrocious things like this happen, and it's usually women. So as a woman myself, I find it very important to represent on the other end of fashion for the women that are making the garments that I end up marketing, basically. So yes, and I think that at the root of everything is mental attitude, mental health. And I feel that in every day, in all societies, people are very consumed with day-to-day matters, and it's hard to get change because of that. And I think that we have to focus on empowering people and removing stigmas and making people stronger individuals. And then we can, at the same time, tackle these larger structural, societal, systemic changes. I think those two things go hand in hand, and you can't achieve the second without the former. So that's where I come in with super role models, and I advocate for raising the age in the modeling industry, as Kering did, which is a huge company that owns many of the fashion houses, and they raised the age. I think the commitment was going to be starting in 2020, which is kind of moot at the moment, but they did make a huge commitment to only use models above 18, which is it sounds small, but it's a huge thing for women in society to be only looking at actual adults in advertisement. If that were the case, if everyone followed Kering suit, which I feel they should, I think it's a very odd mentality to have literal children who aren't allowed to sometimes even consent or definitely not drink alcohol, advertising to 30, 40-year-old women saying this is what you should aim to look like. it's just very odd. And I think that it goes in everyday society beneath the radar. And I think we need to start reevaluating our assumptions, our subconscious assumptions, so that we can really empower people and make a healthier society and then make a healthier planet.
Yeah, I think some of those points are reasonably valid. The other thing, aside from just in terms of kind of expectation setting with the consumers of these brands, is that when children are put into the modeling industry, they're also subject to abuses as well. And the fact that they're not adults, they don't necessarily have the cognitive or the skill, the experience to be able to navigate some of these kind of treacherous waters behind the scene, and they become victimized in some sense, even perhaps by even that they're not just their agents, but also their families that are essentially profiting off their business. Um, any advice to the actual models that are in the system now?
Yeah, so it's very important to me also to build community within the fashion industry, um, because it's a very competitive field and it can be very isolating. You're pretty much alone most of the time. You're going to castings alone. When you're amongst people, they're your competition. So it's very important to build a community outside of castings and the agency, et cetera. And my advice would just to be true to yourself and to really think objectively about yourself and what is sellable about yourself, I guess, but also to really be true to the things that make you at your core you, because they can be your biggest asset at the end of the day.
So actually, on that point, I want to kind of delve a little bit deeply. Again, unfortunately, we don't have a tremendous amount of time, but especially for, let's say, the millennials and certainly the Gen Zers, it is kind of unspoken expectation that they have a certain cause, or they carry the kind of similar vocabulary like that you're using as well. So how do we differentiate what is real versus not? And when do we know that somebody is really pursuing something that goes beyond themselves for something greater and more important, versus just kind of conforming to what the society says that you should be doing? Kind of like what you said earlier, is that people in fashion, people that are modeling, they're expected to have a certain presence in terms of Instagram and TikTok and other followings.
I think that's a great question. I've never been asked before. I think really you can tell when you hear something original, even if it's a slightly different perspective on the same old thing that you've heard a million times. I think then you can really tell that it's coming from an authentic place and that it's really representing the person and yeah.
Okay, great. Tell us about some of your upcoming projects or things that you're getting involved with.
All right. So, during the quarantine now, it's a bit, I've been modeling for mass companies, and I'm doing a course online with Harvard for a certificate in climate change and the health consequences. Um, I was having a lot of meetings prior to this for a large rally that the Model Mafia was going to hold in for Earth Day. Obviously, we're going to have to wait for the next Earth Day.
Okay. Yeah, I think this pandemic and the quarantine has really adversely affected so many people that make their living in a live event or in a physical offline presence. So it's absolutely real. So I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your perspectives. I've been joined by Brana, Dane, who is a model and activist. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.